So, a lot of people tragically think that giving in and giving up are synonymous with this spiritual virtue of surrender, of peace. Spirituality never says, thou shalt be a doormat. Spirituality doesn't say, become a slave to whoever it may be who wants to dominate you. Spirituality doesn't say, give up your freedom into another's ignorance or another's illusion or another's agenda or another's ego. Spirituality does talk about choosing peace and choosing love in every moment. But remember that that includes you. And so a lot of times when we think we're choosing love, we forget that we're supposed to also be choosing love for ourselves. When we think about choosing peace, we're supposed to be choosing peace for ourselves as well, not just for the person who's trying to dominate me or fight with me. And so, if you're being dominated, and especially if you're being dominated into doing things that you know are not right, not in alignment with your dharma, not in alignment with spiritual truths, not in alignment with the higher purpose and meaning, not in alignment with the tenets, the virtues of spirituality, by going along with that, you're actually creating more conflict. Maybe not in the moment, but that's just a very, very superficial way of looking at it. Because what you're saying is, to avoid conflict in this exact time and space, this intersection of time and space, I'm going to allow the seeds of adharma, unrighteousness, to be planted, to sprout, to blossom. Picking up, uprooting a little sprout or a seed is much less violent than trying to uproot a tree. So, yeah, it disturbs the soil a little bit, but a lot less than trying to uproot a tree. And so if you're being dominated and pushed into acting in ways in which the roots of that tree are actually suffocating your heart and your spiritual awakening, enlightenment, opening, well, at some point you're going to have to uproot that. And once it becomes a tree, it's a lot more difficult and a lot more violent to uproot. So saying no is just as important as saying yes. Spirituality does not mean thou shalt always say yes. There's things sometimes we have to say no to. We say no to acting in ways, living in ways that are out of alignment with our truth, with dharma, with our core spiritual beliefs, that are out of alignment with ahimsa, satya, right? You look at the yam and the niyam of a yoga practice. Anything out of alignment with those is something we need to learn to say no to. And anything that infringes upon your freedom, we need to say no. And it's also important to realize that that doesn't mean we have to change people. Somebody may still want you to act a certain way, to be a certain way, to think a certain way, to believe a certain way. And that act of simply wanting is not something that is forcing you. A lot of times we say, oh, I had to do it. This person wanted me to. Or I had to do it because if not, that person would get angry. We don't have to do things. What we have to do is live our truth, live our dharma, live in connection to God, but also be wary of our ego. Because a lot of times, it's very easy for the ego to play as the one with your highest interest at heart. The ego's the one who says, for example, oh, your parents are taking away your freedom by making you go to school. You shouldn't have to go to school. School is just forcing you to do things you don't want to do. Now, if every kid went along with what their desires said, we'd have a population of kids roaming the streets rather than getting an education. If people say, oh, you know, my boss is really infringing upon my freedom by forcing me to sit at my desk all day and do this work, well, the boss has hired you to do that, and assuming that you're not working in a sweatshop, that you're not bonded labor, that you don't have working conditions that violate your human rights, assuming that you're free to get up and leave, recognize that your freedom is also not a license to do whatever you want, whenever you want, and to have everyone else just kind of go along with it. That your parents should say, oh, no problem, honey, you don't have to go to school. That your boss should say, oh, no problem, you don't want to do that? That's okay, I'll pay you anyway. Take the whole week off, go to the beach, no problem, on me. There are systems that we have to follow. We stop at red lights, even if there's no one around. Because if we don't, it ends up leading to more damage later on. And that's an important thing to realize, because a lot of people feel very oppressed by systems of school, their workplace, the laws that we have, and would love to be able to justify anarchy in the name of freedom. And that's where it's really important to realize that freedom is not a license to decadence or recklessness. The freedom we talk about is a freedom internally to live your dharma, to have the spiritual awakening experience of knowing the truth of who you are, and externally to be able to live according to your morals, your values, your spiritual tenets, assuming, of course, they don't violate someone else. But recognize that you then also have to be prepared for the consequences. So if you say, for example, I don't want to do this, you have to be prepared for whoever you're saying that to then say, okay, but then I'm not going to have you as my employee anymore. Or, okay then, but maybe I don't want to be married to you anymore. And assuming that what they were asking you to do is not a violation of who you are, a violation of your human rights, they also have that freedom to respond to you in their freedom. And that's where it's really, really important to recognize what our freedom means. So if you're trying to simply avoid conflict by doing things that are not what you want, that are not in your highest spiritual calling, don't do them. but then have the courage to face whatever the repercussions are. It's not always easy. Taking steps away from what people around us want to do. It's not always easy. But it's the path to living your truest, highest life. I had almost no one who thought it was a good idea for me to leave America and come to India. But I knew it was my highest calling. But it took courage. And so same thing in your life. If you know that something is your dharma, it may be difficult to live it. It may create a little bit of conflict. But that's worth it, because later on, you don't have to uproot a whole tree in order to actually live the truth of who you are. And lastly, realize also that sometimes creating a little bit of conflict for our loved ones actually isn't such a bad thing. Because sometimes that actually pushes them into a deeper level of awareness, a deeper level of having to look at themselves. When they realize they can't dominate you all the time, when they realize that you're not just going to live dancing according to their tune, fulfilling their agenda. If they are open and if they are courageous, they will look deeply inside. Your freedom will become a mirror in their face for their own freedom. And so in that way, even though it may be difficult, it's actually a great service to them. Your courage will lead to them finding the courage within themselves.